Welcome to the How to Die in Mexico podcast. We help expats live better in Mexico by addressing end-of-life worries and fears through education, contemplation, and planning resources. I'm your host, Sarah Mae Conway, author of the book How to Die in Mexico, and you can find me at dyinginmexico.com. Today I'm speaking with Wilka Roig, a transpersonal psychologist, death doula, and president of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation in Mexico. The foundation is partially responsible for Mexico's first ever green burial cemetery located in San Miguel de Allende.
So the foundation started that way, and the intention of it was to be a nonprofit organization that dedicates to social service, or to go into the communities and community outreach and finding out what are the needs and what are the gaps and what are the levels of access or not, and then how can we support communities in bridging those gaps.
To be honest, I was hoping our conversation would be a bit of a how to replicate this green burial model throughout Mexico. As it turns out, it is not that easy.
In other countries where I've, had the conversations with people who are interested in it, everybody gets stuck in it's not legal, it's not possible, the laws don't allow it. And if we keep thinking about what's already been established, it will never be possible, right? So how do we, think outside the box, for lack of a better expression, to be able to see how it is possible?
You can learn more about Wilka Roig, the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, and the work they are doing to transform death culture at ekrmexico.org.
But the first thing that needs to happen is for people who recognize that spark that says, I want to contribute to that, to begin to have the conversations. And then maybe, somebody pops over here with this resource and somebody else pops over here with that resource. And then we join forces to be able to manifest something.
May this episode be of benefit to you, and if it is, I would greatly appreciate your support in the form of a like or a follow, or better yet, leave a review. All right. Well, thank you. I know you're super busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk. Yeah, and there's a million things that I could talk to you about, all things death and dying, but I do really want to focus on green burial today. Um, and maybe it's a good place to start if you want to just say a little bit about the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation in Mexico and kind of what your role is there and what the vision mission is.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation connection came together because I was doing some conferences here in San Miguel de Allende that I called Dreaming and Healing, Soñando y Sanando, and that they were, in a way, sort of a gentle way of opening up conversations about the arc of life, so that, how everything that happens in a life is part of this process of integration and healing and growing and evolving and all of that. And for the second of those conferences that I organized, I invited Ken Ross, the son of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. I consider her my mentor because since, I started sort of being more aware of all of this, especially with loss and how this enriches our living if we, open up to the full experience. I was telling him that, we are finally ready to receive the fullness of her contributions to the field, because we're stuck on some very basic things that have become popular, but that her contributions are so much deeper. She talks a lot about, she worked with children, dying children, and she worked with near-death experiences, and she worked with, other spaces of the field that are not what she is popularly known for. Anyway, long story short, he said, I think it's true. And the place where she didn't get to go and engage as she would have wanted was Latin America. And so for that reason, he accepted my very humble invitation and came and did a keynote. So we started sort of exploring how the legacy of her contributions continues and evolves through the rest of us who are still doing this. And after that, um, after some conversations of how could they support what we were doing here, came the possibility of opening up a what they call chapters of the foundation, which are pretty autonomous, but basically is like a legal lending of the name to advance whatever work people are doing in their communities. So the foundation started that way, and the intention of it was to be a nonprofit organization that dedicates to social service, or to go into the communities and community outreach and finding out what are the needs and what are the gaps and what are the levels of access or not, and then how can we support communities in bridging those gaps. And so the mission of it is to continue the legacy and evolve it to whatever is needed today, to create more safe spaces for exploration and very community based and community focused. And then what we do today is that we do grief circles that are everything we do is free and open. And so we do grief circles in funeral homes and death cafes, online and in person. And we have a volunteer team of doulas. And so we have this whole structure of how we support people in either dying or grieving or preparing for their, end of life, or all of these doula things. Um, so we do that service pro bono, and we work as a team. And so we do accompaniments for people in person and online. And we've been doing so since, well, I was doing it before the foundation, and then it just kind of got structured. And then the other thing that we started getting involved in is green burial, because we see the crisis that we're having as to, where are we burying our dead? What are we doing with our remains? How are we being socially, culturally, and, environmentally responsible? We are not, right? And so the situation here is pretty marked because we've run out of space, right? And the communities that used to have their own burial grounds, at some point in the evolution, right, of our society, those spaces were taken away from the communities, and then everybody was forced to enter into sort of the system, the municipal systems, and all of these other things. And now, how do we reclaim those spaces so that the communities can have their own spaces, so that they can continue with their own traditions? So, how do we rescue culture, tradition, cosmovisions, and then bring back what is rightfully ours, which is our dying, our grieving, our tending to our dying, and all of that. So that's
Mhm.
the gist of it.
Yeah, that's the gist of it, but it goes deep too. Yeah, yeah, I love how you're talking about green burial as it relates to, yeah, being of service to the community, being of service to the climate, being of service to, like, this effort at returning to more ancient, indigenous practices, so to speak, community practice. Um Yeah, so maybe can you tell me, like, a little bit about, I mean, I wanna get to all of that stuff, but I also just wanna know, like, the logistics of, like, you dedicated this green burial space in, I think, 2020, right? In San Miguel de Allende, and I see everywhere it's largely talked about as the first ever in Mexico, is that right?
Well, in Latin America, I mean,
Uh,
not counting the burials of our ancestors, right?
right.
Who are all green. And in relation to Mother Earth and everything else. But yeah, it is the first, technically speaking, green burial, because I make a terrible joke that people are being buried green in the mountain and in the desert and other places. That happens all the time. But in terms of like saying, okay, this is a space that is now with this intention, these different intentions, that is also really an attempt to bring greater awareness to, like certain situations in their environment, everything else, right? And it actually, the first green burial that we were able to achieve here, I always have the dates confused. So let me think. I think it was 2021 or two. I think,
Mhm.
yeah. So I started sort of trying to raise awareness about green burial in 2020. And then, a woman who had been watching me and encouraging me with everything I was trying to do said to me, she called us in to accompany her because she was, in her process of dying. And she said, I've seen you like pass the ball around. It's time to like make the goal. And, it's like a football reference, like a, soccer reference.
Yes.
And she's like, I'm not dying until you find a way to bury me green. And indeed, she did not enter into active dying or not into imminent death until she knew that she was, she would be able to be buried green. And so after we were able to um, do that in a non-formal way, we basically worked on defending her rights from the standpoint of what here is called usos y costumbres, right? So that there are certain traditions and customs that, are important, for religious reasons or for spiritual reasons or, for cultural reasons that deserve that their wishes be honored. And so we were able to find one of the few burial grounds that are still within the jurisdiction of a community rather than the municipality so that we could do it there. And then, checked with the municipality to realize that there are no laws that say you cannot do it,
Mm.
which is interesting. There's a lot of laws that say, oh, it needs to be like this, it needs to be like that. And all of those were tacked on as the funeral industry, was evolving and, becoming dominant, right? So there's a way in which we can look at this and consider the fact that, the laws, it's not illegal because there's no law that says you cannot do it. So, but after we did that, then I was, doing these talks and sort of trying to raise the people to so that, they would ask for it and advocate for it. And somebody from the funeral industry got wind of it and came to one of my events. And then after I gave my talk, he said, "Wonderful talk. I loved everything you said. Um, and I am the funeral industry." And he like shook my hand. And so he was very interested because he's newer generation. This is a business that has been with his family for generations, and that, he began to realize how not environmentally friendly all of those practices are. And so even when he couldn't change what already exists, he was very interested in adding the component that then sort of maybe at the very least balances it out more. He's someone who is a very tries to be very socially and environmentally responsible. So then we were able to collaborate with him and with the let me see what it is in English. The sort of like the environmental sector of the government, of the municipal government, who were starting a program for reforestation in the municipality. And so in collaboration with them and the funeral home, we were able to establish the first official green burial site that is within a hybrid cemetery now, but that is also a reforestation project. And so it's kind of like trying to restore as much as that's even possible, what they had already taken away because they were going to be building more of the conventional current, you know, cemetery structure.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, they had cleared the land of,
Mhm.
to make way for, yeah, traditional vaults or yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
interesting, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like, to have someone from the funeral industry on your side, to have this, reforestation project going on, it was like this perfect timing of all these things coming together.
Mhm.
How much yeah. I mean, is that yeah, I'm thinking, because 'cause I'm thinking, like, how replicable is this in other communities in Mexico? And, now that this has happened, like, is it replicable, or do we need to hope for the same type of luck in other places, right? Or, like, what's going on in, uh, in other places in Mexico?
Yeah, it's been it's a little discouraging. And I will say, I've been sort of trying to get these conversations going in different parts of Latin America, so not just here, because what I understand is, excuse me, is that if we were able to do it, that inspires other places to find out how they can make it possible in their spaces. And then, maybe if we only get to do one, but then Guatemala is able to do one, then we can come back and say, hey, there's also one in Guatemala. We can do more. And then, if it happens in Ecuador, if it happens in Colombia or wherever else, then it builds a momentum and it gets us to that tipping point when it becomes something that everybody starts to think about, right? Or consider or want to do. So I've had several conversations. The thing that is, I think that the biggest challenge is that we need land for that.
Mm,
And to me, this movement is most powerful from the standpoint of conservation of resources, land and resources, that we should definitely do all of those things because where we're at today, not just, here, but globally with how we're dealing with our land and everything and all this development and all these other things, if we can secure lands through green burial, then that's even more, it has much more of an impact, right? So, so I like to talk about that as much as I can because there are some people who are more interested in land conservation who then may be thinking about, oh, this is one way that I can start to do, protection in perpetuity. I don't need to dedicate all of the land to that, but I could, dedicate some part. It's also bringing power to the community because ideally these could be spaces that are tended to by the community. And it also then, weaves in healthy grieving and it weaves in like, restoring our relationship to nature. Right. So there's just so many things that there's so much potential with that particular movement.
mhm.
So what has happened here is that there's still too much of a mentality about making money. And if I have land, I better get this. And if I'm going to be making this project, then I better be an investor and get money back from this. Everybody's going to die. This is a great business. And while that's possible, and I see it happening in the States more easily, um, it feels what I've observed is that it kind of goes counter to what the soul of this brings. Right? And so the moment that you start to talk about money and investing, every attempt that I've seen come up has fallen apart.
Mhm.
Like when individual interest comes in, there's something that is lost and then somehow it loses momentum. So I have consulted with maybe 3 projects after the one that we were able to achieve here. And it gets stuck there in that whole money thing. So that's something I'm observing. And then in other countries where I've, had the conversations with people who are interested in it, everybody gets stuck in the it's not legal. It's not possible. The laws don't allow it. And if we keep thinking about what's already been established, it will never be possible, right? So how do we, think outside the box for lack of a better expression to be able to see how it is possible?
Yeah, it is an obstacle. The need to monetize the green burial, which, as you're saying, like, runs totally counter to maybe the value of green burial. So I do like this idea of coming at it from a land conservation area, and it occurs to me that so much of the problem of getting people to care about conservation and even climate change is partnered with this larger problem of death denial in general, right? Like, just not not wanting to face the reality that we're all gonna die, not wanting to face the reality that we're on not a life-affirming trajectory with how we're dealing with climate and the land, so yeah.
I know, isn't that something, right? Like, the death denial in itself is one of the contributors to not being responsible with everything else. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
The other thing that so there's the environmental thing for, there's that branch that could get people engaged. There is as I said, the rescuing of traditions and cosmovisions that, you know, used to rule is not the right word that I wanna use, but, like, we're the way, right, before. The relationship with nature, well, the outside nature and the inner nature, and understanding that it is reciprocal and that it feeds us and we feed it so that it could feed more, and, it is like that is what's life-sustaining. Embracing the fact that we're not here forever is what is life-sustaining, right, or life-affirming. And so that's why all of these things are related, right? Because on the one hand, there has to be more conversation and get people to realize that it's not scary or jinxing or, damning or whatever to talk about it and to contemplate the fact that we are going to die. I mean, and um, so we have to get people more comfortable with that. Then we also have to talk about the fact that when we are, you know, in collaboration with the life death cycles, with our own nature, with the nature around us, then the process of loss, the process of grief, and the process of dying are also more harmonious and collaborate with us, right? So, we think that dying is medical, it's really natural. It has become medical, and we cannot deny that, but that is truly unnecessary for our dying.
Mhm.
Dying without medical intervention, which is all of the dying that I hold space for, is the most fluid, easeful, beautiful. You can learn so much from it. The dying person can, in their last weeks and days, teach us so much that they leave knowing that they left a legacy behind just of how to be human and how to live and die easefully. So there's so much that we're missing out on, right? So if we talk more about those things, then we're starting to see, oh, okay, so maybe there's a different way in which we can relate to it. And then on top of it, how much nature is, the external nature, because I mean, we are nature, supports our healing through grief,
Mhm.
right? So to return to nature, not just to return our remains to nature, but for us to return to nature in order to honor our dearly departed and also to honor our process of grieving and adapting to a life that now has to live without the presence of this person in physical form and all those things. It's also a life sustaining and life affirming cycle, right? So to engage with all of this allows us to live better, grieve better, and die better.
Yeah, I do love this component of reforestation, like a burial ground, so to speak, as like the ground for reforestation. And in that way, like really affirming that in death, we can be part of life, and generating new life. Yeah. And so, like, what are, is it, like so I live in a rural community here, and I know that there's, you know, specifically talking about, foreigners who are coming to Mexico from the United States, and maybe they come from areas where they have experience with this concept of like putting their land into trust when they die or doing some type of conservation. And they're like interested in doing that type of thing in Mexico, and they're thinking more about along these lines of like, how can I be a steward for this property that I bought in this country that I've immigrated to? And so maybe, like, I don't know, do you foresee any opportunity there for people to, um, yeah, give over their land to these types of projects, or like what needs to happen?
Yeah. I mean, if somebody's already thinking, how can I sort of give back? Right. And then how can I give back to the community who that receives me and that then nurtures me and gives me a quality of life and makes me feel at home and, all of these things. As you were talking, it just like I saw it in this way of like, with urban development, for example, when we were evolving into the where we are today, there was a consideration of, okay, so for as much land as there is, this portion of it needs to be dedicated to the handling of the remains of the community, right? And here, for example, when you have a private cemetery, you still have to donate a certain percentage of your space to the municipality in order to get the permissions, right? So there's a way in which that has been designed into what we today assume is like the way. So to think about, okay, so if there's this much land, is there a way that some of that land can be donated to the community so that they can have that sort of autonomy, or I don't know what it's not self-governance, but this capacity to then make their own choices.
Mhm.
When we first buried the first burial that we did, which was in this community, which is an ejido, right? So it's those lands that were given to the communities long, long ago. Um, our only proposal was we will do the consultation. We will get the people that are outside of the community who want to bury green and bury there. And then whatever is charged, which we were thinking about something really simple, so long as it can cover the expense of like transporting the body, of sustaining the body without having to take it to the funeral home. And then, the actual burial making a hole, that would be the expense. And then in addition, sort of a part of the total that would be the expense, and this other part would just be a funds that would be dedicated solely for paying the people from the community who are going to tend to the space, maintenance things, these kinds of things. We thought it was like perfect because we're talking about, I don't know, no more than 5,000 pesos, and it would still be not only self-sustaining, but also enriching the economy for the community and like giving people jobs and, engaging the community. And then, there's other things that could happen too, education about, the nature of that. Is it endemic? Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Um, but then what happened in that case is that there was an uprising in the community about not wanting to have foreigners buried there.
Mm.
And that's why it didn't go through. And, there was a lot of argument from some part of the community there saying like, hey, if they're supporting us, it's a fair exchange, right? But there were
Mhm.
other people who were really, really not like they did not like the idea that they'd be burying foreigners.
Yeah. Because this is, it's very rare that a foreigner would even be buried in a municipal cemetery in Mexico, right? Like
Mhm.
most extranjeros get cremated and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to overcome. And the work that you're doing and educating people is so important.
Mhm.
Like, are there, because you're doing all this work in all of Latin America, is there any country in Latin America that you're like, this is a shining example, or they are most likely to get on board soonest?
I started conversations with Guatemala in, what was that, like 2022, I think it was. And it seemed really promising. And what it seems like is this, that places that are already established, that are private cemeteries, have an easier time being able to do whatever they want within their spaces, right? And so we started very promising conversation. I mean, ultimately, all I'm doing is just provoking people to think about and like expand their perspective about what's possible and then maybe do it or not. And so it seemed like they were really into it. And last year we had the second gathering of Red Latinoamericana de Acompañamiento en la Muerte y el Duelo. And they came and we did like work tables around how do we get this to happen. And then it kind of lost momentum for the reasons that I'm telling you, right? So people are a little too intimidated by the laws and assuming that that is the be all end all of the whole thing, and therefore they give up. Um, they don't know how to sell it because they either want to sell it. So there's all of like I don't think those two things are totally compatible, even though the States has managed to do it. I think the culture here is different, and therefore, like in the place here, their main concern was they couldn't make green burial cheaper than their cheapest burial option
Mhm.
for no other reason that they don't want people just choosing to be buried green because it's cheaper. Right. And anyway, once that whole thing starts to come up, it's very discouraging to me because it should be accessible to all people. Um, and that's we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I haven't followed up this year with Guatemala because they were supposed to come to the third gathering and they didn't. So I haven't had that conversation. Um, and then there's people have started the ecological burial, which is not ecological at all. And that in itself also the reason why those people can respond in opposition of green burial for conservation or for reforestation is because it's a business.
Mhm.
And they are selling a concept that you live on through the tree. But that is totally not in alignment with nature.
Yeah.
So it is problematic in so many levels. All right. So I was gonna be doing some of this outreach somewhere else. I'm not gonna name it right now. And my event was sabotaged before it happened. And for what I suspect is that the people who are now making money because they're ecological, but they really aren't, can't afford to have people be awaken to a greater awareness of all of the implications and the fact that, if you're going to be burying in nature, you're not going to be burying, ashes that the cremation pollutes everything, but also the ashes themselves have a pH that is damaging to the land and to the roots and to the trees. And so it's really all for show.
Mhm.
And not only that, it is encouraging this individuation or individualization, whatever that word is, like it's about the individual. It's not about the community. It's not about nature. It's about me becoming a tree. And so, the project of reforestation requires some awareness of how does the ¿cómo se llama? Ecosystem
Mhm.
thrive, and then looking to how it thrives naturally and to support it as it's thriving in a space where we are just nurturing the land with burial. So, no, you're not going to have a tree on you unless a tree grows on you after. And we cannot make that decision.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. So you're talking about, like, this, phenomena that we're seeing. Yeah, I'm seeing it a lot in Mexico, yeah, of you can purchase a biodegradable urn and your ashes go in there, and then there's this private, assume privately owned park, and you can have a plot to bury this urn and plant a tree, et cetera, and, yeah, I mean, it to me, it's like a definite greenwashing. It's like,
Totally.
uh yeah, and I see that it's heavily monetized, hence, like, but I wonder sometimes if it's like, for example, I'm a yoga teacher, and when I first started teaching yoga, it was very much like this world of yoga for fitness, and everybody was, like, picking and choosing just this one part of the yoga practice of, like, I want to lose weight or I want to like look better in a bikini, right? And I feel like now so many years later, like the yoga community as a whole has sort of moved past that and recognizes it more as like a holistic spiritual practice. And so I'm wondering this about these like what do they call the eco parks or what do they call them?
Heidi Coberl or
Yeah, eco burial. Yeah, like, is it possible that that this is like a very first step in introducing even the idea,
yes.
and that maybe people will like, I don't know, be willing to like explore more this word eco in connection with burial and then kind of learn, oh, but that's not the real thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I do see is that regardless of how not ecological it is, the fact that people are having to go, you know, into a natural space, that is less intervened with structures and all these things, that, that there's a connection with the earth, that the air is cleaner, that going to commemorate your loved one is going into a forest or whatever it is that you have to walk trails and like, take your time and see a lot of green and all of that. That in itself already is very healing. So people at the very least with those spaces are learning that loss and grief can be navigated in a different way. And there are marked positive benefits, that is I'm like, that's an oxymoron, right? Like a benefit is a positive thing. Anyway, so that there's that. We're gaining that. We're gaining both the possibility of what eco might mean, but also we're grieving better thanks to it. So yeah, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater or whatever, but you know, I would really love to see us just moving away from anything that is just about, capitalism and individual benefit and all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's frustrating, like, if you do have this private land, potentially you also have the opportunity to just offer green burial there, right? Um,
Mhm.
c can we go back to the law a little bit? And because I thought I heard you say, it actually is legal. You're saying, like, people are intimidated by the laws, but then I think I heard you say it actually is legal to be buried directly in the dirt and not have to be encased in cement and all of this.
Well, for example, the only reason why embalming came to being, it was because they were bringing corpses back from war zones to be able to, keep the body as long as possible so that the family members could see it, and then say goodbye to it or whatever. There is no real benefit of embalming except for the fact that it keeps something without rotting. But we have very natural option, well, not natural, but more, much less toxic options of sustaining a body without rotting so that people can be with it. So there's a law about embalming only because it became a requirement because the funeral homes can charge for it and they can have, funerary director courses and charge for them and, embalming processes, all of that. So it's like you see the web of how this all came to be is not questioned, but it's like that's not even relevant really. And then, for example, the law says, and in most places that I've explored it, that a body needs to be placed in a hermetically sealed container or whatever, ataúd, in order to be buried.
Mhm.
But the truth of it is that any organic thing cannot be in a hermetically sealed container because it will explode, right? So we're not even really questioning like the absurdity of these things, right? So that's number one. But the point is that there is no law that says you cannot. And people are only looking at what the laws say. The laws say it has to be this, it has to be this, it has to be this. The law does not say it cannot be this, it cannot be this. right? And if we have everything in place, I mean, and the green burial movement and the home funeral movement already have all this stuff very well figured out, we can um, desmentir is uh, debunk, I guess, all of
Mhm.
these myths around what is required. Now, the law that we do have, at least in Mexico, we do have, is that we have that right to our usos y costumbres.
Mhm.
So a Jewish person has a right to their uses and customs, which means that they must be buried. The bottom of their thing needs to be able to like touch the ground directly.
Mhm.
They're not embalmed. So that's happening because it is defending the right. So in that same way, somebody's personal conviction, you know, dogmatic, whatever, cosmovision, whatever, the law defends that, right? So, one of the things that we looked at was the easiest way to start a green burial site, if we have the land and we just want to do it, we still have to get educated as funeral directors because we have to know the laws and we have to know all these things and like blah, blah. And then if we became a church,
Yeah.
a religion, right? So if we organize as a religion, the religion of land conservation or whatever it is, and like upholding, ancient traditions, then within our usos y costumbres is the requirement. And then all of the requirements of green burial are part of that, how we dispose of the remains of those from our community. Now, the thing about that is like, I definitely don't want to start a religion. We would have to get everybody to convert, and I'm not interested in an inquisition of any kind. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
but it is a way that somebody could do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, even if you like step back from burial to what happens right after death, like here in Baja California Sur, we apparently have this law of like if you are a US or Canadian citizen, no matter what, you have to have an autopsy. And I've spoken to a lot of people who said they've fought tooth and nail, for, on the basis of this like customs and religion. And there's like absolutely zero, no exceptions. Like this is a mandate from the US government. Um, and so, yeah, that's interesting to me too. It's like an obstacle of like how much the law, so to speak, in quotes, like, can vary throughout Mexico, between all these states, and then, like, yeah, what might work as the argument in one area, um, and maybe, like, even I mean, you tell me because I'm always curious too about, like, this issue I don't not like issue is not the right word, but just, like, national pride or, like, I'm not Mexican, right? So, like, I don't know what the temperature is on this, like, desire to move away from colonial practices and back to more indigenous practices. But I wonder, like, how much of the death positive movement in Mexico and this idea of green burial is, like, framed or, how much Mexicans care about it on that level of like, why are we doing, these practices that, like, weren't even ours to begin with, you know? That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I mean, it surprises me greatly how unquestioned current traditions are upheld, and that
Mhm,
there is no questioning of where does this come from? How do we get here? And what was there before?
mhm,
A few years ago, I did a tour in several different places around Mexico for the Days of the Dead. I did it 2 different years, and asking people, why they're doing what they're doing. How does it serve them in their healing through their grief? All of these things. And they had no clue. And not only that, they didn't know where the tradition originally came from.
mhm,
They just know it's this thing that it's very Catholic. I mean, it has some elements of the remains or the residue of how it used to be and why, but people don't, they just keep going and without even questioning it, right? And like today we have the muerteadas and like it's like something that came out of a James Bond movie, but people think it's now like a Mexican tradition that was always there.
Mhm.
So there's something interesting about not questioning the effects of colonialism that I see in other places, like, in Puerto Rico right now, that awareness is very, very high. And there's a lot of sensitivity around it because, maybe because it's a smaller place. Mexico is so big that maybe it just kind of washes out.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's this part of like they're just accepting things without questioning them. But if you go to particular communities, like I was in this, in Oaxaca, but like outside of the Oaxaca city area and stuff, and talking to communities that are still self-governing and all of that, to them, and even here in San Miguel, that community that we did that first burial in, everybody was like, "Oh my God, like all I want to do is be buried like my grandfather was buried," or how, da da da. And they still remember
Mm.
because it wasn't long ago that they were still being buried in petates and like, right into the soil in their own land and all of those things. And so that's why I felt like connecting with the communities so that they can just say, "Oh yes, let's rescue this before it's too late." That could, even when they're not thinking about colonialism and all this like brainwashing with all of that, they could still recognize this thing and say, "I'll do it for that reason."
Mhm.
Right? Um, and I think that's more powerful than trying to get them to see that they have this wool over their eyes about everything. To be able to because that's something that is graspable. It's and that they could defend.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, to end on a good note, like, I don't know, like, what are you most excited about that's happening around this whole issue of green burial in Latin America or, um, just the education that you're doing or any project of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation?
Well, I'm excited about, that more people are coming out of the woodwork who are understanding these issues and willing to do something, even if it's in their community or whether it's in their town or in their country, depending on that is now really rising up, right? So I co-founded the Red Latinoamericana because I understood that if we empower everybody where they are, and then, we cross-pollinate information and experience, then we can support each other to get to that tipping point more quickly.
Mhm,
I also know that it is an arduous path and that we are building it as we go along and that it's not going to happen tomorrow, you know? Um, Death awareness or like death positivity and all of these things has been challenging to really plant the seeds or even have the doors open because a lot of the things that are dealing with grief and dying are their own little niches that on the one hand are again, about individual benefit. They have the attitude of solving problems. You know, Dying is a problem, grief is an epidemic. I
mhm,
won't name, but some big association who's supposed to be supporting our grief in this country, that's what they said. It's an epidemic and it needs to be cured.
mm,
Right? So there's a we're fixing it. We're dealing with it. We don't need death awareness because the problem gives us jobs, it gives us power. And so I know that that's not how we're going to affect change. It's in the smaller spaces, it's with the individuals, it's with the communities, and that something will spark and then something can happen from there. So, what keeps me excited is that possibility. And I'm always curious to see when and where.
what can, say me, for example, or anybody, like if someone's like, I am interested in this, I want to be buried green in Mexico, I want to help support these types of projects, like what can people do to get involved or to help support you or the foundation or the movement?
Well, I think they just need to step up and say, but like I said, there's all these barriers, right? So if somebody has land, where is that land? What are the layers of government? Like, who is going to be involved? Is it a community that is like interested in sustaining it? Or do we have to also build the community that will sustain it?
Mhm.
Right. So there's all of these different elements. But the first thing that needs to happen is for people who recognize that spark that says, I want to contribute to that, to begin to have the conversations. And then maybe, somebody pops over here with this resource and somebody else pops over here with that resource. And then we like join forces to be able to manifest something. Today, there's not one thing that we could say, oh, yeah, just step one, this, step two, this, that's it. But
Yeah.
people need to be so driven by that passion that none of the barriers that you encounter are going to dissuade you from like going forward. Because otherwise, I mean, and that's what I see too. Somebody's like, oh, I have this great idea. I want to do this thing. And then their first barrier, oh, forget it. And now they're like, hairdressers or something, like changing very dramatically from where they were going.
Yeah.
Answered your question, but
Yes, you did, you did. No, I mean, I'm hearing, like, the personal, individual drive and passion, but then also, like, using that drive and passion to rally your own community of supporters
mhm,
and, like, you know yeah, have your own community of supporters that come from all different facets of the private, the government,
mm,
the all of it together. Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Well, that feels complete.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Wilka.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, I look forward to speaking again about this super
Yeah.
secret, exciting project.
I like to make time for these things, as much as I can make time. This is part of the work, this or the
Yeah.
mission. It's part of the mission.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's talking, educating, getting it out there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
You too.